My brother Brandon met me at the door of the historic Castle Hotel in Boston, put his palm flat against my chest, and said, "Board members and direct heirs only tonight. Hannah, you stopped counting years ago." Behind him, under a gold banner reading 50 years of Vance Corp, my stepmother Evelyn caught my eye and waved me off, the way you wave off a waiter you did not call. I did not argue or raise my voice. I stepped back, found the hotel manager by the coat rack, handed her a red zoning folder.
Marcus turned pale, stared at the distinct thermal graft pattern, and immediately stepped outside with his phone without answering Mason's jokes. If you've ever been judged by those who never took the time to know your true worth, like and subscribe to stay tuned for the full story.
6 months before I was turned away at the heavy oak doors of the Castle Hotel, my father Arthur sat behind his polished mahogany desk in downtown Boston and slid a tarnished brass key across the wood toward me, alongside a thick leather property file. He looked at me with the tired eyes of a man realizing his 75th birthday was approaching and that his life work needed to be put in order. For decades, he had built Vance Corp from a modest regional developer into a commercial juggernaut, but as the company approached its golden 50-year anniversary gala, Arthur wanted a complete and immaculate historical asset audit. He told me that I was the only person he trusted to do the work properly, without asking for favors or cutting corners, because building an honest and unvarnished record of corporate holdings was the one thing I knew how to do without seeking anyone's permission. Across the room, standing at the small executive kitchen counter, my stepmother Evelyn was pouring tea. She was not cooking or preparing anything, just standing there with a linen tea towel held between her thin, manicured fingers. The moment Arthur mentioned auditing the original title deeds, specifically the flagship headquarters land parcel in central Boston, I watched Evelyn's hands go completely still on that towel. She did not turn around immediately, nor did she raise her voice. She simply chimed in with a light, airy laugh that sounded rehearsed and hollow, saying that there was no need to make Hannah run through dusty archives for the headquarters parcel, as that side of the corporate founding was straightforward and settled decades ago. Arthur chuckled warmly, telling her that everyone thought their property records were simple until I began digging into the municipal registers. Evelyn turned then, offering my father a smooth, loving smile, but as her eyes crossed his shoulder to meet mine, the warmth vanished, replaced by an icy, unblinking glare. I did not think much of her expression in that moment, but looking back now, I realized it was part of a pattern that had been carefully constructed for years. To understand why my family felt so comfortable locking me out of the Castle Hotel, you have to understand the narrative my brother Brandon had spent 4 years polishing. Fall 4 years ago, at a Sunday family dinner, I had made the mistake of bringing my professional enthusiasm to the table after resolving a complex land boundary dispute for a high-profile client. I casually mentioned over dinner that I would love to properly audit Vance Corp's founding land registers one day. Before my father could respond, Brandon let out a loud, mocking laugh and warned Evelyn to watch out, claiming I was an obsessive auditor who spent her life digging up corporate ghosts and hunting for skeletons in property ledgers. Everyone at the table laughed along with him, turning my professional dedication into a family joke. I brushed it off by dessert, but Brandon filed it away. He understood that my ability to read municipal ledgers made me a direct threat to the room in his mother's past that held a lock, and so he quietly began building the story of me as a paranoid sister, whose word could never be trusted. This is the trap of cruel normalization. When emotional exclusion is delivered slowly, wrapped in light jokes and casual dinner table jabs, you stop recognizing it as cruelty. It becomes the baseline rhythm of your life. You tell yourself that your brother is just abrasive, or that your stepmother is merely protective, accepting their condescension as normal routine until you realize that unkindness with a systematic plan behind it is something far more dangerous. What I actually do for a living is restore clarity where families and corporations have allowed lies or negligence to rewrite history. As an independent property archivist and land auditor, I settled the legal questions people are too afraid to ask out loud. I fix broken titles, untangle fraudulent deeds, and build the evidentiary spine that holds commercial assets together. When I took Arthur's file back to my office, I turned to the one chapter of Vance Corp's history that every family member knew by heart. The official narrative was that Arthur's first wife, my biological mother Catherine, had voluntarily signed a quitclaim deed, transferring all her inherited land rights to Arthur before abandoning the family and disappearing completely in 1991. For 35 years, Catherine had been treated as the silent, shameful shadow at the origin of our family empire, a woman who chose to walk away from her husband and daughter that night at 2 o'clock in the morning under the warm circle of light from my desk lamp. I spread the archival registry map beside Vance Corp's earliest corporate tax filings. I pulled up the municipal boundary logs and set them side by side, expecting a clean paper trail to confirm the established story. But as my eyes traced the lot numbers and deed references line by line, the numbers refused to align. The clean historical record I expected to find was not missing because of lost paperwork. It was an absence with a very specific, deliberate shape. The search for the true title to Vance Corp's flagship headquarters began the following morning before I had even poured my first cup of coffee. When an archivist encounters an absence in a municipal ledger, she does not simply assume the paper was misplaced. She goes to the basement where the original bound books live. I drove 2 hours down to the Suffolk County Registry of Deeds, descending into the cool, fluorescent-lit basement repository where land records from the 20th century reside in massive, leather-bound ledgers that no digital database has ever fully ingested. I spent 6 hours pulling the property transfer books for 1991 alongside a senior clerk who had worked those archives for 26 years. We pulled the Master Grantor Index, the quitclaim registry, and the vital statistics cross-references for Catherine Vance. The clerk ran her finger down page after page of hand-entered property transfers, stopped, adjusted her reading glasses, and looked up at me. She told me flatly that there was no quitclaim deed signed by Catherine Vance registered in that county or anywhere in the state index for 1991. Nor was there any record of her death. Instead, Vance Corp had secured their commercial title insurance using a single forged notary affidavit, a cheap piece of fabricated paperwork designed by Evelyn to bypass the auditors and bury my mother's legal rights forever. 2 people can live quietly, but land transfers leave signatures, seals, and recording fees in public books that outlive the people who signed them. To be entirely certain, I broadened my search, paying for formal, certified title and death record searches across 3 neighboring counties. Weeks later, the official windowed envelopes arrived at my office, each containing an embossed, stamped statement from a county registrar certifying under oath that a diligent search turned up no record of land transfer or dissolution of property rights for Catherine. Arthur had always believed Catherine filed for a quick, out-of-state divorce before she vanished, because Evelyn had conveniently handed him the fabricated paperwork decades ago. But these local county seals proved the legal truth. My father's marriage to Catherine had never legally ended, making his subsequent marriage to Evelyn entirely void. A missing page in one town can be an accident, but certified absence across 3 counties is a pattern with a very deliberate shape. It meant that the legal foundation upon which Vance Corp had constructed its $100 million downtown headquarters was completely open, a ghost title resting on top of a living woman's untransferred rights. Before taking my findings to my father, I decided to ask Evelyn sideways, testing the waters the way I do when interviewing a client's distant relative. At Sunday family dinner, while helping Evelyn chop vegetables at her marble kitchen island, I kept my voice as light as the weather and asked if she remembered which specific registry office handled Catherine's 1991 land release so I could file the historical documentation properly. Evelyn's knife stopped dead on the cutting board. She did not turn her head, but her posture went entirely rigid, and when she spoke, her voice lacked any of its usual polite, social charm, sounding flat and dangerously cold as she told me that some deeds stay underground for a reason and that I would do well to leave old dirt buried. Before I could respond, Arthur called out from the living room, asking what we were discussing, and in the span of a single breath, Evelyn snapped her face back into a warm, radiant smile, calling back that we were just talking about family history. That instant transformation terrified me more than the missing land deeds, because it proved my stepmother was capable of running a seamless performance across decades without ever dropping her mask. 2 hours after I returned to my apartment, my phone rang. It was Brandon. We rarely speak outside of formal holidays, but his voice on the line was smooth and sharp, like a polished blade left out in the sun. He told me that Evelyn was deeply shaken by my probing into historical corporate assets and warned me to stay away from Vance Corp's founding ledgers, adding with quiet malice that Evelyn told him everything. A mother who reports a 20-minute kitchen conversation to her son within 2 hours is not grieving old family tragedy. She is managing a containment operation. A few days later, Arthur's sister, my Aunt Diana, dropped by my office and poured herself a glass of wine, chuckling carelessly about how Evelyn had always been neurotic about her privacy, taking those bizarre quarterly trips to manage the family's private affairs. When I asked what trips she meant, Diana waved her glass and explained that 4 times a year, like clockwork, Evelyn drove out of town for 2 days to manage a private holding called the Shell Trust Account at Boston Commercial Bank under Ledger Code number 88B. My stomach dropped as a childhood memory surfaced. 4 times a year, my entire life, Evelyn would pack a small leather overnight bag, kiss my father, and vanish for 48 hours to attend to personal matters, returning quiet and drained. I went straight to my father's old personal check registers, which he kept stored in rubber-banded bricks in his study. Flipping through 30 years of carbon copies, I found the quarterly payments. Starting in 1991, 4 times every year, a check was drawn from Vance Corp's subsidiary accounts made out to Ledger Code number 88B, with the memo line consistently marked CH Maintenance in Brandon's precise accountant hand. When a paper trail vanishes from municipal county ledgers, it does not mean the evidence has ceased to exist. It simply means the money moved into a higher, more sophisticated system of concealment. The very next afternoon, I pulled the public nonprofit tax disclosures and state regulatory filings for Vance Corp's offshore holding shell, sitting in the quiet reading room of the state repository. As an auditor, I know that public disclosures carry a terrifying legal weight because executives must sign them under penalty of perjury. Turning to the signature block on the most recent annual filing, I saw it printed clearly in dark blue ink, Brandon Vance, Chief Financial Officer. Below his signature lay the line item disbursements that detailed where the corporate foundation's charitable funds were actually being routed. Under tax line item 402, listed under nonprofit community outreach, was an unbroken series of annual disbursements totaling $150,000 directed to Green Mountain Care residents in Burlington, Vermont, a memory care facility located 400 miles away, specializing in long-term, highly secured residence for aging patients who could no longer manage their own legal affairs. My biological mother, Catherine, had not abandoned her land or died on a quiet road. She had been systematically placed inside a private care residence in Burlington, Vermont, funded every quarter through corporate tax line item 402 to ensure her quiet, uninterrupted silence. To bypass strict medical privacy laws, Brandon had forged a durable power of attorney, legally naming himself as her sole guardian so no nurses or doctors could ever ask questions about her true family. But as I scrolled down to the bottom of the financial summary, the true engine behind my brother's loyalty came into focus. Right alongside the nursing facility disbursements was an authorized management line item. Brandon had not simply been helping Evelyn manage a family secret out of filial devotion. Every single quarter, drawn directly from that holding account. Brandon collected a staggering $250,000 administrative fee for maintaining the paperwork that kept an erased woman off our family tree. My brother was siphoning a quiet $1 million a year just to ensure Catherine remained legally invisible. 3 days later, as I walked toward my car in the damp concrete basement of my office parking garage, a shadow stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. It was Brandon, his coat open, his hands jammed into his pockets, staring at me with cold, unblinking eyes. He did not bother denying a single document or figure because an accountant knows better than to argue with a verified ledger. Instead, he leaned against my car door, blocked my path, and looked down at me with a slow, practiced smile. He told me flatly that whatever paperwork I thought I had gathered in my red folder meant nothing, because for 4 long years he had deliberately constructed my reputation across every holiday table and board meeting. He leaned closer and whispered that he had spent 4 years framing me as the bitter, jealous, unstable sister who was obsessed with digging up dirt on her own family, so that the day I finally showed up with a piece of paper, everyone in the room would already be too exhausted to listen. He patted the hood of my car, laughed softly, and told me that nobody would ever torch 50 years of an empire on my say-so. That night, I took my compiled evidence to a neutral land use attorney downtown, paying for an hour of private consultation without revealing the corporate name. I laid out the certified missing deeds, the unbroken marriage, and the forged land release documents on her desk. The attorney reviewed the certified clerk stamps, leaned back in her leather chair, and gave me the unvarnished legal reality. She explained that if Catherine Vance had never signed a valid quitclaim deed transferring her inherited property rights in 1991, then the original title transferred to Vance Corp was completely void from day one. That meant Vance Corp's flagship $100 million commercial headquarters sat on land it did not legally own, placing the corporate empire's primary asset in catastrophic legal jeopardy. Knowing the magnitude of the storm that was about to hit, I decided to give Evelyn one last chance to do the decent thing. I went to my father's house on a Tuesday afternoon when I knew Arthur was away at a medical appointment. I sat across from Evelyn at her dining table, laid a copy of the Burlington residence filing between us, and told her, quietly, that I knew Catherine was alive in Vermont and that Brandon was taking $250,000 every single quarter to manage the secret. I asked her to tell Arthur the truth herself before the gala. Evelyn looked at the paper, and in an instant, her calm maternal mask shattered completely. Her face turned pale, her knuckles went white against her teacup, and she stood up, towering over me. She did not deny that Catherine was alive. Instead, she hissed that if I spoke a single word to Arthur, she and Brandon would use my history of emotional isolation to have me forcibly committed to a psychiatric facility, and that starting immediately, my name was officially wiped off the guest list for the Golden Anniversary Gala. I walked out of her house without another word. But that evening, while reviewing my bank statements to prepare for the end of the month, I stumbled across a transaction record from 4 months prior that made me pause. Months ago, when Arthur had first asked me to organize his anniversary gift, I had personally called the historic Castle Hotel in Boston to reserve the private dining hall for the Golden celebration. I had put the $15,000 private room reservation deposit on my own personal credit card as a surprise present to my father. Evelyn and Brandon could scratch my name off the family guest list, but they could not erase my name from the master account. Sitting alone at my dining room table late into the night, I compiled every document I had gathered into a formal evidentiary file. I placed the certified title deeds showing Catherine's unbroken ownership on top, followed by copies of the forged quitclaim land releases from 1991, the certified no divorce statements from 3 county clerks, and the signed corporate tax disclosures showing the Vermont Care residence disbursements. I slipped the entire file into a slim red leather check folder, the kind a high-end restaurant uses to present a final bill. I chose that red folder on purpose because I wanted the truth to arrive looking entirely ordinary, like an overdue invoice presented at the end of a long meal, so that no one could ever accuse me of causing a scene or staging a theatrical public spectacle. On the night of the Golden Anniversary Gala, I dressed as if I were attending a royal wedding, set the red folder on my passenger seat, and drove to the historic Castle Hotel in Boston. I parked across the street in the dark, looking through the tall, arched windows at the grand ballroom filling with bright light, crystal glasses, and over 100 corporate investors, board members, and city officials. Through the glass, I could see Evelyn moving through the crowd, glowing in an emerald dress, accepting congratulations. But at the head table near the doors, I saw my father Arthur, dressed in his black tuxedo, turning his head every few seconds to watch the entrance. He did not know that my name had been wiped off the official guest list. He was watching the door, holding his glass, waiting for his daughter to arrive with the historical report he had asked for. Crossing the street, I stepped into the hotel foyer, where Brandon immediately met me at the threshold, placing his hand flat against my chest and delivering his rehearsed line about board members and direct heirs only. I did not argue, raise my voice, or try to push past him. Instead, I stepped back, walked over to the senior hotel manager standing by the coat rack, handed her the red leather folder, and gave her very specific instructions. I reminded the manager that my name and my credit card controlled the master account for the evening, meaning she answered directly to me, not to Brandon. I told her that when my father stood up to give his keynote anniversary toast, she was to walk up to his elbow and hand him the folder as a special anniversary delivery from his daughter. Then I walked out to my car in the cold night air, turned on the heater, set my phone on the dashboard, and waited. My cousin sat at the head table inside, her phone tucked beneath her cloth napkin, sending me minute-by-minute text updates. Her first text read, "Arthur is standing up, tapping his glass with a spoon." A minute later, manager just handed him the red folder. He thinks it's a gift from the hotel. He's smiling and showing Evelyn. Then a long, agonizing silence fell, lasting 4 whole minutes while my pulse raced in the dark. My phone lit up again with 3 short words. "Oh my God." My cousin later told me that Arthur had opened the folder expecting a commemorative plaque, but as his eyes scanned the certified clerk stamps and the property titles, his smile froze. He read the certified statement confirming no land transfer had ever taken place. He read the line item disbursements funding Green Mountain Care residents in Burlington, Vermont. And then he reached the signature block on the corporate tax filing, signed in dark blue ink by Brandon Vance, Chief Financial Officer. The room of 100 investors went dead silent as Arthur set the red folder down on the white tablecloth with extraordinary care. He turned to Evelyn and asked one question. "Is Catherine alive?" Evelyn did not say no. She reached for his sleeve, whispering his name, but that silence was the ultimate confession. Then Arthur turned to Brandon, who tried frantically to reach for the folder, claiming I was crazy and unstable. Arthur placed his hand flat over the papers, pointed directly to the signature line, and asked in front of the entire room of investors and executives, "This is your signature, Brandon. Is this your signature?" Brandon stared at his own name in blue ink, his face draining of all color, unable to deny his own handwriting. Arthur stood up to his full height, looked slowly around the grand ballroom at the banner reading 50 years of Vance Corp., and turned to Evelyn. He said quietly, 50 years of an empire built on an erased woman." Then my father picked up the red leather folder, turned his back on his wife, his son, and his company, and walked straight out of the Castle Hotel doors into the parking lot, heading directly toward my car. Arthur refused to return to his home that night, checking into a quiet downtown hotel instead. The following morning, he called me to his room, set 2 coffee cups on the table, and asked if I would drive him 400 miles to Burlington, Vermont. We made the long drive in complete silence, watching the highway stretch through the northern mountains until we pulled into the gravel driveway of Green Mountain Care Residence. Sitting beside Catherine in her sunlit room, Arthur took her frail hands in his and spent 2 quiet hours apologizing for 35 years of corporate deception carried out under his name. Catherine looked up with soft, untroubled eyes. Her memory long faded, but the peace in that room restored something fundamental that money could never buy. Back in Boston, the legal consequences unfolded with swift, unyielding precision. Agents from the Massachusetts Attorney General's Corporate Fraud Division arrived at Vance Corp's executive offices, serving Brandon with a formal indictment for real estate fraud, forgery, and embezzlement, while the board of directors met in an emergency session to strip him of his chief financial officer title. Evelyn's fraudulent land claims collapsed under judicial review, leaving her isolated and stripped of her corporate standing. Because the $100 million land legally belonged to my mother, a probate judge formally appointed me as Catherine's legal conservator. To avoid a catastrophic shareholder lawsuit, Arthur liquidated his personal founder's stock to make the corporate investors whole, effectively buying the compromised headquarters outright. Then, acting on my mother's behalf, I legally severed the land from Vance Corp's commercial portfolio and transferred it into a permanent land preservation trust. I stepped in as the executive director of the trust, ensuring that the land would serve the public interest rather than corporate greed. True justice is never about the hollow satisfaction of tearing down those who betrayed you. It is about taking the reclaimed pieces of your heritage and planting seeds for something clean, ethical, and enduring. On my first day directing the trust, I took the restored 1984 registry map, clean, verified, and bearing Catherine's true title line, and placed it inside a glass display case in the center of the official corporate archive. It stands there today as an unshakable reminder that certified truth will always outlast a well-rehearsed lie. Thank you for walking through this journey with me. If this story reminded you that the truth always outlasts a well-rehearsed lie, please like, subscribe, and share your story in the comments below.